Hi, this is Sean, and this channel's called Wolf Dog Moon. Today we're going to be reviewing and discussing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition, Player's Handbook. If you like this kind of content, smash that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more, ring the bell for notifications, comment down below, and share with your friends. Alright, let's get into this. Alright, as promised, I'm going to do a review and discussion of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition and what makes it so special. And indeed, what makes it one of the best, and maybe the best of all times, in terms of role-playing Dungeons & Dragons adventure. Alright, let's get into this. Alright, so if you've seen some of my other reviews on this channel, then you know what this will be about. But if not, I encourage you to go through our playlist. We have it on our channel. It says role-playing discussions, I think. And you can go through there, and I would point you to something like Basic Fantasy, for example. And also some of the other reviews that we did. We reviewed 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, we reviewed Pathfinder, we reviewed Dungeon Crawl Classics, as well as some other types of role-playing games, such as Anima Beyond Fantasy, and also Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and a few others. So, I encourage you to go check those out for more context. Other than that, let's get into this. Alright, so, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition, Player's Handbook, is the longest running version of Dungeons & Dragons in terms of how long it was around before they came out with the next edition. Now, this is also, I think, the final edition done by the original company, TSR. And it includes many of the original Advanced Dungeons & Dragons rules. They ended up with this 2nd edition kind of tweaking and making adjustments mostly to the combat and how that's done, and then also some of the classes and different aspects, like they added a lot of optional rules and stuff, and I'll take you through and show you a lot of that. But right off the bat, I would tell you that this is called Advanced for a reason. It's Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, not just Dungeons & Dragons. So right off the bat, I would stress that that's something you should pay attention to. That I'm going to back up a little bit. Originally, there was, with TSR, there was like two philosophies in terms of the design of Dungeons & Dragons. And so they ended up with, for the core concept of the game, they ended up with essentially two lines of products, and one was the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and then the other was like the white box, red box editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Now hold on one second, please. Alright, so here is the two different lines of Dungeons & Dragons, and also the two separate design philosophies. The one common thing is the D20 system, as well as the Dungeons & Dragons name brand. So you have the red box edition, and this is the one from the 80s. And then you had the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Now, the difference between these two is that this is more of a simplified and more of a beginner-friendly version of Dungeons & Dragons and Dungeons & Dragons style adventure. So you have certain rules in here with the different classes, and also the archetypes, like you got the elves and the dwarfs. They call them demi-humans in this. And this caps the level, for example, of what you can get to as like an elf or a halfling or a dwarf. Like, I think they cap out at level 9, and then a human can go up to like high levels, like almost 199 level, and beyond maybe. So advanced Dungeons and Dragons is meant to be to stress more role playing and also present a more realistic focus to the game. So they had these two different philosophies in the company. And so again, I would stress the advanced part. It's not just Dungeons and Dragons. This is an advanced version of the game. And so I would point to that as its unique element and also unique status. Like, this is still a special place in Dungeons and Dragons, and I would say if you've never played this version of Dungeons and Dragons, I think you should, just so that you can see how the game can be played in terms of what I call Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is the theater of the mind. It's designed at the concept level to be about role playing. Like in here, they remove any kind of board game elements or design philosophy. In other words, for example, this sets it up where the dungeon master will tell you how far something is away from you in feet, not in inches, because in inches is so that you can use something like miniatures and kind of board game stuff. Here, the focus is squarely on you imagining the scenario, and so in that way, it also has a much more organic aspect to it and more realistic. So we'll get into this in a second. So I just wanted to show you the two different lines, and so I'm going to pause it for a second so I can give you a little bit more context. All right, so I went and grabbed the 5th edition Player's Handbook, and right off the bat you can see the difference between these two systems. Nowhere does it mention advanced. This is advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This is just Dungeons and Dragons. So what this really is more of that red box version. And I'm going to grab it just so we can make this clear. This is more akin to something like this, but even less so. Like, this is more like a video game design philosophy slash board games and role playing. So it's kind of, the phrase I would use is it's dumbed down in order to homogenize it. Everything's homogenized so that you're basically mostly just rolling one dice, and that it's similar to a board game. Whereas, I'm going to slide this over. This is incorporating a lot of design work, and right down to the dice that you're rolling and the way the different elements of it to make sure that it's not homogenized. Like, this is the version of Dungeons and Dragons before the homogenization happens. So each class in the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and how you play your character is going to be much more realistic and organic in that way, because the homogenization is not going to be there. A thief is going to feel, they call the rogue a thief in this version of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, is going to feel much different than the wizard, and the wizard is going to feel much different than the warrior classes, and so on and so forth. They're going to be rolling different dice even. For example, the thief will be rolling percentage dice. And then also and how the characters level up. And then in addition to that, and I'll take you in and show you some examples. Again, just think advanced and also think in terms of the theater of the mind. This focuses more on you creating unique characters that aren't class specific necessarily. So you can create a fully fleshed, almost realistically feeling character and that's very memorable and different. Even if you have two wizards, for example, in the same party, they're going to feel much different by the time you're done with the character creation process. So let's take a look in here and I'll show you some of the systems. But right off the bat, I would tell you, okay, this, for example, doesn't use the modernization, the homogenized rules for the D20. Another thing, in terms of like this, has its own systems for how you do combat, and armor class is different than how you do something like skills. In here they have optional rules to give you a choice of how you want to handle the other aspects of the character beyond your ability scores, and such as non-weapon proficiencies. And the non-weapon proficiencies in this, they're very unique and very colorful, and they help to distinguish your character from another character. And then the other thing that this does is everything is tied more to your ability scores. So the ability scores become a factor in how your character is role played. And then in addition to that, you also have a lot of depth in terms of, with the armor class system, in terms of the different type of weapons and how they work. So you have bludgeoning weapons in here, and they do different. Some armors give bonuses or minuses depending on if you're going to be hit with a blunt object or a piercing object or a slashing object. So there's a lot of depth in here. This feels, when you're playing it and when this everything's clicking, this feels, it comes alive in a way that the other more modern systems in their homogenization doesn't. A lot of those newer systems, they feel like you're taking a video game and trying to create a role-playing game that simulates a video game too. And this one doesn't do that at all. And then the other thing with this, and I'll show you later, they have a system in here called THACO. And what that does essentially is it does two very important things. Three very important things. Thirdly, I would just jump to the third thing. It keeps it from becoming homogenized. And then the other important things it does is it puts the power squarely in the hands of the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master is the boss in this advanced Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of onus in terms of the rules and how the characters level up and how the game plays out is in the hands of the Dungeon Master. And then the second thing that it does is, and the best way to put this is that instead of you telling the Dungeon Master, oh, I have +6 to my attack when you roll the D20, this tries to make it more feel like organic, where you just tell the Dungeon Master what your THACO is, and that means to hit armor class 0, and then the Dungeon Master tells you if you hit or not. That's how this plays out. Because, in other words, you're not saying, oh, you roll the 20-sided dice and you roll the 10, but you have +6. So you say, I got a 16. Instead, this wants it to be like the theater of the mind, where you're saying, all right, I strike at the goblin, and I just rolled, and the Dungeon Master just asks you what you rolled. And then he can ask you what your THACO is, and then he determines if you're able to hit. So I'll show you how that works in a second. We'll open this up, but let's get into this so that this review doesn't end up too long. And I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I'm excited about this one. This is the system that I played the most growing up, and I've tried all the systems and also other kinds of systems, and then the ones that are like the retro clones, where you have they're using the OSL, they're using the open game license and stuff, and they're able to create kind of a retro feel and stuff. And but a lot of them don't do the advanced Dungeons and Dragons version. And this one, it is advanced because you have it. A lot of the stuff is at the concept level, and you have to understand how to proceed in terms of for the dungeon master. In a lot of ways, you maybe would have started on the red box version, and then once it's like you graduate to this one. You know what I mean? The other one's kind of like high school, and then this is like college. So you're going kind of like to the pros in a way when you get to the advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So that's like college basketball or something, and this is the pros of basketball. So let me open this up. Now, the other thing, first of all, just get right to it. You get a lot with you got the Forgotten Realms, you got Ravenloft, you got Dark Sun, you got all this stuff that came out because of this second edition, because of how much it allows your imagination to take over, and you're able to freely imagine in a role-playing way all these different scenarios in your character and stuff. It feels as alive as it could possibly be, it being a game. So you have all these different worlds at your doorstep, as it says, and stuff. And out of this, you get awesome characters like Dritz the Word and Bruno Battlehammer. And then you had the Dragonlance, and Tanis, and Raceland, and all those characters. So, all right, let's get into this. Talking too much, but I hope you'll bear with me on this one, and let us know down in the comments what your favorite system is. Although I'll tell you right now, this, I consider this to be arguably the best version of Dungeons and Dragons, and it is the advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So if you want to go advanced, this is the one that you would do. Now, the question is this right for everyone? Is this the best for you? So that's what we're trying to do in this review / discussion. So let us know down below what you think. All right, let's get into this a little bit further here. So the player's handbook here, this opening page kind of takes you in, and it's just the cover in black and white. Now, I'll say right away with this one, feels much more like a reference book, and it's set up that way, and that's one of its strengths, actually. It's not focused on colorful artwork, although there are some color pieces in here, but there's not a lot of artwork in this one. It's probably the least sexiest in terms of that kind of stuff, where you have a lot of artwork and stuff, and to help you imagine. This one, it being advanced, it's kind of apropos. It wants you to just use these rules and you freely imagine what the different elements of the game, whether it's the dragon, you picture it on your own. So that's what this is trying to do. And so you have a forward for it and stuff, and then everything right away, you got a table of contents and everything, so you can go right. It's very well laid out like an encyclopedia. You can go right to the combat section, and again, they use a system too, an acronym called THACO, which stands for To Hit Armor Class 0. So, it sounds like it is complicated, but it really isn't. And it actually, once you get the hang of it, it actually is awesome, because now you're focused on role playing instead of these arbitrary plus numbers on your. It tries to take away you focusing on your pluses and stuff, and how much you're going to be adding to the roll. And I'll show you how that works. So you have this right away, you have this cool image that kind of takes you into this version. And I'm going to let you take a look at this. All right, so yeah, this is an awesome image where, okay, these guys, they went on this adventure, and you have these different archetypes and stuff. You have a wizard, and you have a warrior, and then this looks like a thief, and then you have a cleric, and you have an elf archer. and they took down this, I think this is like a baby dragon or something, and they're all proud of what they did. So that's an excellent way to do it, and it's one of the few color images in here. So this focuses very much on being, it's got appendices in it, and this has multiple optional rules. And so a lot with the second edition, you get a lot of variation and also house rules, because you're able to customize this to get the game that you want and get out of this as much as you can and stuff. And I will say too that all the other editions that come after this one are in this edition. You can take this second edition, and for example, if you don't want to do Thatco, or you don't want to do armor class, where the armor class is low, like if you have a 3 for armor class, that's good, versus making everything in an ascending amount. You can do that in here. You can easily adapt this. It's just the reverse of what it says. All you have to do is reverse it. It's no big deal. And then so this explains why they did a second edition. And ultimately, the reason why they did a second edition is that they had made a lot of come up with a lot of new articles and stuff. And, you know, Gary Gygax was writing a lot of new material and stuff. And there was some rules that kind of were wonky and stuff. And they wanted to clean those up and also present a new edition where they also wanted to take out some of the darker elements of the game, and like they had assassin classes, and so they had some like pseudo or anti-hero or evil archetypes in the original Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and so this one seeks to remove those. And I don't blame them for that, because to me, these role-playing games should be focused on the hero's journey. And so from a logical standpoint, it doesn't make sense to allow evil right from the concept level for you to play as a character. I mean, you could always do that and shoehorn that into your adventure on your own. The dungeon master could allow that and stuff. But right from the get-go, if the focus is at the concept level for you to be a hero, then I don't think you should be including like something like a half orc, for example. And I've explained that in other videos and stuff. So this starts off with a glossary, which is really cool. And then it gives you an example of play and shows you how to do it and stuff. And you'll get the hang of it that way. Now, what's cool about this, again, I would stress that this is like an advanced way to play Dungeons & Dragons, so that you're focusing on role playing, and this allows you to be able to do it. But there's different philosophies on what that means. So, and also, you know, what kind of characters you're able to create. So right from the get-go, when you're rolling ability scores, for example, this gives you alternate dice rolling methods. It gives you 6 different methods to use, which is pretty cool. And so this takes you through all the different ways you can do it. And so even something like a point buy system, it originated in this second edition. It gives you the option. It doesn't say, okay, there's one way to play the game. That's what's really cool about, there's a modular feel about this second edition that's kind of baked into the cake. It's baked into the system at the concept level. And so that's pretty cool about it. What we did was we rolled 4d6 and dropped the lowest dice. And then we allowed you to choose whatever. In other words, we didn't say, okay, you have to write these ability scores in this certain order, like alphabetical order or something, and each roll that you do, you're stuck with that roll. If you want to put your best roll in strength, we allowed that. And then so that makes it so that the person's not just going to tear up their character or get their character killed on purpose. Because like my brother, that's what he would do if like the character was like, okay, this character stinks. He would be like, I just run at the goblin or he would just do reckless things and get killed. So you kind of have to work with the players that you have so that everybody's having fun and stuff. So it has the different ability scores. Now what's cool about this version is it incorporates other types of dice. And so, for example, percentage dice in this instance would be used for strength, for bending bars and lifting gates and stuff like that. So, and also how much you can carry and is tied to your strength. A lot of stuff in this second edition, which is awesome, is actually tied to your ability scores. And I'll show you how that's done. It's not just in the terms of the bonuses. A lot of the newer versions of the game, they give you a bonus and then it's forgotten in a lot of ways what your ability score is. If your ability score, if you don't have a bonus or a penalty, it's just ignored, but not in this version of Dungeons and Dragons. So you got all the traditional stuff like that. And then see, this is what I mean about the artwork. You have this a monochromatic quality to it, almost like a reference book. So you'll have this blue tone that they use, and then you get some black and white and a little bit of color artwork, but there's not a lot of it in here. You have to use your own imagination. So for some people they might find that too dry or whatever, but again, I'm gonna reiterate it. This is called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons for a reason, and you just like a college textbook or whatever. You know, it's not going to be all about the color pictures and stuff like you would have in high school or middle school or something. This is meant to be a reference book, and it's at the concept level where it does that. So you got all the different, you actually have gnomes in here, and then this includes half-elves, which again, it's not an evil race, but I think that's being too sophisticated. But like Tanis in the Dragonlance books, he was half elven, and so it played out where that was a part of his character development and stuff. But it's one of those ones where you should either play an elf or play a human. You're just gonna be kind of hamstrung, is how I would say it. So you have halflings, and then the humans. Humans can do a lot of cool stuff in here that the other archetypes can't, because these, like the gnomes and the other characteristics of the elves and stuff, they have all these special abilities right from the get-go. Humans have all kinds of other types of advantages in here, like they can dual class and stuff, and they're the only ones that can, and they can also specialize and stuff. So it's cool in that way. Now, another thing I would say right off the bat with this second edition is how the character classes and also the character archetypes are balanced is much more realistic than any of these more modern ones where it becomes homogenized. Like each one feels much more distinctive, and they're all measured against the fighter, the warrior class, because that's going to be the workhorse of this system. And you have to ground your abstractions, and so that everybody has a reason to play the warrior. And then if you're not, you're essentially playing an alternative to the warrior. And that's how it should be, because if you don't do that, then you have to kind of twist yourself into a pretzel from a design standpoint to try to get it to be worth being a fighter. Like in the other 5th edition that I showed you earlier, being a fighter is like you're kind of being a chump, because you could be a wizard and casting cantrips on every round. Like they kind of diminish the fighter to, oh, you're gonna be a fighter. They make it. And so they have to do artificial stuff like add maneuvers and all these other things that almost feel like a wizard, where the enemy's rolling saving throws because you have these different, expertise dices that you're rolling. And it starts to feel more like a prestige class, and it shouldn't. It should be the workhorse of the system. And this second edition does it right. And then, for example, if you're going to be a wizard, you're going to be casting lightning bolts eventually, and you're going to be doing fireballs and magic missiles. It's only just in a way that you're just a glass cannon or you're paper thin. You need to be protected by the fighter. You're hiring the fighter to watch your back and do the dirty work while you get your spells ready. And this is the system that does that. And from 3rd edition on, they get it wrong, in my opinion. It devolves into, oh, everybody's important and everybody's can fight every round and everybody is like a video game character. So this definitely makes sure that doesn't happen. So if you're looking for a much more organic and also logical, where it doesn't hurt your brain, then this is the system for you, 2nd edition. And also with its modular ability in terms of it giving you many different options, this would be the system, I would say, where if you want to focus on role playing and create unique characters that feel special, this is also the version. That's why I say, even though this may not be the sexiest version, and it also has added complexity in terms you have to use your imagination with this. In that way, again, I would reiterate, it's called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons for a reason. And then if that's what you're looking for, where you want to feel you have these characters that are real, breathing, living characters in a sense, and feel that way, then this would be the system for you, as opposed to some of the more modern systems that are homogenized, where it feels like your character's more like Storm from the X-Men or one of the X-Men characters, and they're just really just superheroes where there's no real cost to what they're doing. In this, there's a cost and a price to some of these other fancy classes and magical classes and stuff. So right then and there, I'd say that's what makes this special and separates this from all the other systems, and why this also was the longest running version of Dungeons and Dragons. It has a special place, and I think this is well worth checking out, especially if you love this hobby and stuff and you want to see how it can be done from the theater of the mind, like a role-playing way. So you got bards and thieves, and what's cool in this is the thief, and I explained this before, uses percentile die. Here it is. You use percentiles, so you're not rolling. And what's cool is the dungeon master's rolling some of this stuff, because and that creates intrigue and excitement, because let's say you're going to pickpocket somebody, you don't know if you're going to be successful unless you're putting a lot of points in there, and because you're like the thief class should feel like a gambler. You're gambling. And there's other aspects to the thief too, like you can get a non-weapon proficiency where you do gamble. You're a card. You have a non-weapon proficiency in gambling. And so this character should feel like a gamble, where the dungeon master rolls, where you say, I'm going to hide in the shadows, and you don't know if the monster's going to see you or not, and it creates that sense of foreboding and worry. And so you're heart-pounding excitement and stuff. And then when the thief is caught, or he tried to pickpocket and they caught him, everybody's laughing and, oh, you got caught doing it, kind of thing. Rather than him just rolling the dice and, oh, I had +5 and well, you failed, because he rolls a 5 or whatever. Everybody knows he fails. With this, you don't know if he failed. And so the dungeon master can create a lot of fun around that. So again, they use percentage dice. And then then you get backstabs that way by hiding in the shadows. And you got the multi-class and dual class characters. Another thing that's cool about this one is there's class requirements that you have to have certain scores, but there's also like the class specifics, like being a ranger and some of these specialized classes, there's prerequisites, and they're hard to hit. So you had to roll really well to get some of these kind of gifted classes. Like a ranger is kind of like he's a warrior that has a lot of gifted abilities that the regular warrior or regular fighter in this doesn't have. So this forces you to have had to roll high enough to kind of been lucky enough to be able to choose that type of archetype, like a ranger or one of those super specialty classes. And then there's restrictions what the ranger can wear in terms of armor in order to balance it. Again, everything should be balanced against the pure warrior fighter who's the workhorse of the system. And that way it's always, because that's the hero's journey is the fighter with the sword that takes on the dragon, not the wizard. The wizard would always be a kind of the secondary character in the story, because the magic comes from a place of mystery, whereas the fighter using a sword is something we can all understand at a logical, grounded, it grounds the abstraction. So in this particular version of Dungeons and Dragons, it does that. So rather than this being like Harry Potter or something, where, it's not grounded where he's getting his magical abilities. In this, the wizard is getting it through study and lots of time and patience and stuff. So thus the wizard can't use any weapons other than like a quarterstaff or a dagger. And because those don't take any skill, because he didn't have time to work on any of those things. So this also has prerequisites in order for you to choose a specialty archetype in here, one of the elves or a dwarf. You have to score a certain amount in order to do that with your ability scores. So and then this is cool. It has alignment. Again, I would have stressed the advanced part of this. You're meant to have an alignment, and that will dictate how you role play your character and also flesh out your character and make it more realistic. Here's another color picture. Now, the other thing, and I'm gonna stop this for a second. Give me 1 second. All right, we're back. Now, what's cool is they give you in this multiple different choices in terms of the proficiencies, they call them. Instead of skills, which is in a lot of ways is too generic. This uses proficiencies, what you're proficient at doing beyond your ability for your class. So here you got weapon proficiencies, and you have a certain number of slots because you wouldn't be able to use all the weapons. So there'd be weapons that you never got to train with, even if you're a fighter or warrior. So this again grounds the abstraction and makes it feel more realistic and organic in that way. And then when you're role playing, if you get your hands on a weapon and you're not proficient in, if you're a warrior, you like a baseball player or athlete, you can still use that other equipment, but you just don't use it as well as you do with the stuff you're proficient with. And then what's also cool is they give you different options in here. You can do non-weapon proficiencies, or this allows the dungeon master to choose instead if he wants to do secondary skills. So it's called secondary skills, and it gives you a simple list of secondary skills. But right off the bat, what's cool about this compared to something like the newer editions is this doesn't feel homogenized, even the secondary skills. You get these ones that are more colorful, like farmer or gambler, forester. It's not specific to trying to make your character a superhero, or it's not some special feat. It's just basic occupational abilities outside of you being able to wield a sword, for example, or cast spells. You could be a jewelry, you could appraise the gems that you acquire in the dungeon and be able to tell, okay, which ones are the ones worth keeping if you don't want to be overburdened. You can only carry so much. You find a dragon's treasure hoard and you can only carry so much. So you want to be able to appraise the gems that are worth taking out of there and getting the most bang for your buck in that way. So that's what's cool about this second edition. It's an awesome way to play a role-playing style adventure, and in my opinion, it's the best version in that way. But again, at the end, in my final thoughts, I'll let you know if this is the best version for you, because there's been so many versions of Dungeons and Dragons style adventure now. So we got, and what's cool with the non-weapon proficiencies, the other thing is, besides this awesome list that you get, they have general ones, which is cool, that anybody can choose. And then they have class specific ones. And you can choose, even if you're not in these classes, you can choose one out that's outside your class. It just costs more slots. So you get slots to use. And so you're not barred from these other classes. Special proficiencies. Like one that was always cool was this tumbling, because it helps your armor class when you're tumbling, and it makes you very acrobatic. And then some of these other ones were cool, like, disguise and forgery and stuff could come in really handy. And the other thing about these non-weapon proficiencies, they could be used in these very creative ways to help you get out of jams in the different adventures that you do, and also used in very unique ways. Like ventriloquism was one that got us out of trouble because we made one of the king's guards say that he had committed the crime instead of us. And so instead of having us to fight or get thrown in jail by the king, he threw his one of his soldiers instead, or his chief advisor. And because my cousin had rolled so well, my brother, who was the dungeon master, was like, okay, it worked. The king knows that this guy is a scumbag or whatever. All right, so moving forward, and the other thing that's cool about how the proficiencies work is they're tied to your stats, so your ability scores. And what you do essentially with this is you roll, let's say your dexterity is 16, and you want to use your tumbling skill. It says right here the dexterity is the relevant thing, and then there's a check modifier, and in this case it's 0, so you're able to do it. So if you roll a 16 or less, that's how this works. So the non-proficiency uses your ability score, and so only if you roll a 17, 18, 19, or 20, you would fail the tumble. So as long as you roll a 16 or less, and that's really cool because it goes back to your ability scores. And there's another part in this, for example, saving throws. If you can use your ability score as opposed to your saving throw values to get out of trouble. Sometimes you just ask the dungeon master, I want to use my ability score instead. And then you would do it similar to this, and he might apply penalties and stuff. Instead of having to use your saving throw to avoid the dragon's fire, dungeon master might be able to allow you to do a tumble to get out of the way and use your dexterity, which is really cool option. And it adds a lot of flavor when you're playing. It adds a lot of where you can use your charisma. A lot of times charisma is not used in any other systems, I feel like. I mean, it's used for something maybe like persuasion and stuff, but that's so generic. Where this allows you to use, I want to use charisma. Can I make a charisma check to see if I can get a lower price in the tavern with the barmaid? So stuff like that adds a lot of flavor, and again, role playing. And again, I would stress the advanced nature in that way of this version of Dungeons and Dragons. So moving forward, and I don't want this to be too long, even though this is my favorite, one of my favorite versions, if not my all-time favorite, of Dungeons and Dragons style adventure. Now you have encumbrance. Again, they give tons of optional rules. So what you'll find a lot of times with this version of Dungeons and Dragons is it allowed the dungeon master to really, again, the power is squarely in his hands. He's the boss in this version, and it allowed him to customize the game to make as many people happy at the same time as possible and make it a fun, exciting experience. And that's what this really does really well. Now, in this version, you use armor class ratings, and so the lower the number, the better. And what that does is it keeps the game from being homogenized, and also takes the numbering of trying to get your bonuses up high and focusing on that too much. Instead, you're focusing here on, okay, in full plate armor, so my armor class rating is 1, and so you need to score. The dungeon master knows that only a high roll, it takes some of the work out for him. He has to roll a 19 or a 20 to hit this a warrior with that kind of armor, and so it also adds a lot of flavor to the game. And then jumping ahead, one other thing I'll talk about quickly, just so that this doesn't end up being a 60-minute video. And give me 1 second, please. Okay, so I skipped ahead a little bit here. So in combat, for initiative, for example, you don't roll a d20, you roll a d10. So again, this is kind of like the anti-homogenization system. So it allows you to use all those colorful different types of dice to spice up your adventure. And so in this instance, you're using your 10D, your D10 to do the initiative, and you're adding your ability score bonus to your initiative. So that's how that works. And I think in this one, it's the lowest score wins. Let's see. So let's see, combat, initiative, and you guys can correct me down below if you know for sure. Initiative roll determines who acts first. Initiative is normally determined with a single roll. There are 2, so they give you optional. They have a standard initiative procedure using the 1d10 for each side, and then if it's individual, you use initiative modifiers and stuff. So this allows a lot of depth, and that's one thing I also add with this system. Like for this particular version of Dungeons and Dragons, it has so much depth of the feel of the game, where you can really get immersed in this version. These optional rules, they're awesome in the sense that they're trying to give you all the different blocks of tools that you want to use as a DM to create this rich feeling and adventure and role playing with tons of depth. And they don't want to say, okay, this is the one way you can do it, and that's the only way you can do it. This says, okay, there's a few different ways you could do this, and here's how it would work. So you got that, which is really cool. And then let me see if I can jump ahead here a little bit so I get close to wrapping this up. So again, you got the different saving throws. Again, this is another thing that they get wrong in the newer editions from the 3rd edition forward, is they homogenize the saving throws, whereas this is much more specific and adds much more depth, much more color, much more realism in terms of the logic, and just distinguishes each of the character classes much better. So there's that. And then you got, see, going forward, you got that kind of stuff with turning undead. And let's see, you got, I wanted to see if, okay, we're into treasure, so I went too far. Let's see here. I'll back up for a second. So we got initiative still, and then here it is. This is the other thing I wanted to point out. You got weapon types versus armor modifiers, which is cool. Optional rule. But what's awesome about this too is that it remove any kind of homogenization. You're not going to find it in this. It gives you the options to create as much depth as you want to for your game, and it keeps it from being any kind of a board game or video game. So you have these different types of, okay, banded mail against slash, it gets a +2 bonus and a +1 against bludgeoning. But let's see, chain mail is weak to bludgeoning, so it gets a -2 penalty. Now, last but not least, they use a THAC0 system. And what's cool about this system, and here it is, it stands for 2-hit armor class 0. That's the acronym. And so right here at level 1, everyone needs a 20 to hit armor class 0. And so as you level up, the warrior now at level 2 he can hit armor class 0, which you'd have to roll a 20 to hit armor class 0. So you'd have to roll a crit at level 1 to hit a creature that has an armor class of 0. And then, but at level 2, the warrior can roll a 19 to hit armor class 0. Do you see how that works? And what's cool is you're not adding up bonuses and all that kind of stuff. It's more theater of the mind in that way. Yes, you have to kind of know how to subtract, but you learn how to subtract and add when you're in school, just so you know. And so just like when you're at the cash register at the store, you're supposed to know how to subtract and add. So that's why this is advanced. It's meant to, it assumes that you're an intelligent person. And, even an elementary kid can get this. I played this when I was in middle school. It's easy. And so here at level 4, for example, the THAC0, and this is just a generic THAC0. For example, if your warrior has a bonus, maybe at level 1 he only needs a 19 because he has a +1 bonus. Do you see how that works? So if your warrior has the +1 bonus to, for example, his to hit and strength, at level 4, at the base, he only needs a 16 to hit an armor class 0. And what that does is you roll the dice, and the Dungeon Master only has to ask you 2 things. What's your THAC0? And he just checks the monster, and based on what you rolled, if whatever the armor class is of the monster. So if, for example, it speeds up play too and makes it feel organic. So I'll give you an example. If the armor class is 14 of like a goblin or something, and you're a 2nd level warrior, and you hit armor class 0 by rolling a 19, and then you roll a 13, and again you hit, and the Dungeon Master doesn't have to really do any thought. It's like he can if you, for example, if you're level if your THAC0 is 10, you're level 11 warrior, and you're fighting a monster, and its armor class is 13, and you roll an 8, okay, the Dungeon Master automatically knows you hit. So it's easy. It makes it easy. It's quick. It's because you hit armor class 20 with a 10. So it makes it easy and quick, and also now the Dungeon Master can focus on how awesome your attack was and stuff, and he can describe it. Oh, you crossed his chest and obliterated his armor too, and he fell to the ground and is not moving. Hold on. Alright, so I'm going to give you my final thoughts on this one. And let me know down in the comments what you think, and also what version of Dungeons & Dragons that you like, or if you've played this version of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition Player's Handbook. Now, if you could pick this one up, you might be able to do it from a discount. I highly encourage you to do that. I highly recommend playing this version of Dungeons & Dragons if you've never played this version before. Because what this version does, and to me, arguably, it's the best version of Dungeons & Dragons for the pure role-playing aspect to it. And it's in the name as well. It's called Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. You're taking the role-playing to the next level in this version, where it's the theater of the mind. You're focusing on your character, and you're creating unique, colorful characters that are uniquely different than other characters in your party. And you're also able to fully imagine, right down to how the combat is done, in terms of it speaks in feet rather than inches. So it's having you imagine, and this really puts the controls of the game in the hands of the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master is the boss in this one. You're not going to be arguing with the Dungeon Master in this one. It's going to be clear cut. It starts to organically make sense. And because you're focusing on your character, you're not saying, okay, I have a +8 bonus and I have this feat and this other feat, then I should have hit. And the Dungeon Master's like, you didn't hit. And now there's an argument at the table, and it can devolve in that way, especially in the more homogenized versions after 3rd edition, where, you know, the Dungeon Master's getting frustrated because you're challenging every one of his calls. And this one, because of its nature in terms its focus on role playing, and it's also organic, and it's also it's taking the focus away from the homogenized nature or the video game, board game stylings, and it's having you create a more realistic and living feeling character that's grounded in the abstractions and logic. And that's what this particular system does for the advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It really does feel advanced when you play this version. And you also have multiple different types of dice that you're using. Again, you have the thief using a percentile dice. And then there's certain other roles where you'll be using percentile dice, such as bending bars or opening up a gate. And then your ability scores are tied to the non-weapon proficiencies in your secondary skills. And in that way, it grounds your character and balances it against the other characters in your party. And then you have the different classes and also the different archetypes that require different prerequisites and different requirements in order for you to do them, so that it is balanced, so it doesn't feel all the same and homogenized, and also so that the warrior, which is the most grounded character that you can play, it's just a man with a sword that is trained hard and uses athletic skills. Anyone can understand that and is want to take on a monster. And you can even face monsters in real life. There's people who act monstrous. And if you go back in history, people used swords and stuff, so it's easily understood. And once you balance all the other character classes and you include strict requirements in order for you to play that, and that's all to keep the warrior, the fighter, so that it's meaningful to play that class that should be the workhorse of the game, if you understand my meaning. And then the other thing this does is it creates like a THATCO system, which is cool in the sense that it allows you to focus on role playing rather than adding up your scores. The Dungeon Master will do it for you. You just let him know what your THATCO is, and then he determines if you hit or miss and what it looks like. And so again, that plays into the theater of the mind. It also plays into the organic feel, and where your character comes alive as you're playing and feels and makes decisions like a real person would, rather than, okay, this is a video game styling character with these different attribute scores like you would have in a video game like Skyrim or something, where it's just a collection of those different data points, but ultimately it doesn't feel like a real person. This version of Dungeons and Dragons, you can fully imagine your character, and so can the other people around the table, and they're not going to be frustrated with how you just start dealing out death at every swing with your sword because you're essentially one of the X-Men. You're really just Wolverine. You're a superhero character, but you're thrust in this game where they're trying to play as a character that's more rooted in something such as Conan the Barbarian or Lord of the Rings, where Aragorn's not able to, do somersaults and all these other things, or he's acting like a video game character. In this one, you're going to feel much more like a living, breathing character, and it's going to be more about imagination. So, my final thoughts with Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition is that if you want to go advanced, if you want to take it to the next level where your focus is on role playing and playing a character, again, they have the non-weapon proficiencies in here, which make your character feel really unique, and it can be used in very creative ways. And they're not just specific skills that and make your character feel like a video game character. And here they make you feel like, okay, you were once the son of a blacksmith, and so you're able to do some blacksmith work so you can work on your own armor when it gets damaged, versus having to pay somebody in the town to do it. So that's what this version of Dungeons and Dragons does. You know, there's all those little minutiae that you're able to do in here, and it adds a lot of depth and flavor. Now, who I would say that this is not for, and again, getting back to, I feel this is the best version of Dungeons and Dragons, and it is advanced for a reason. Now, what I would say is, if you're looking for more like a video game styling, or you want to be this super powered character right from the word jump at level 1, then there are other systems for you, such as Pathfinder, or the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, or even 4th edition, one of those. You'll feel like a video game, you'll feel like a superhero, you can kill 3-4 people with one swing of your sword. If that's what you're looking for, then this may not be for you. However, what I would say about this is you can still do that in this one. It's still there, it's at the concept level. So if you talk to your dungeon master and you were able to get this, you might be able to get this at a discount somewhere at a secondhand store, this Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition, or you might be able to even find the PDF for it. And if you can do that, and hold on one second please, you know, and if you can do that, pick this up secondhand, you might be able to play this styling of the game. And if you talk to your dungeon master and you want to have a little bit more of a power level, you can do that in here. It's all in here. All the other systems that came after this one, 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, their roots are in this one. The roots of this game goes all the way back to the beginning. So you can do, again, for example, if you want to take this and just adapt it to the modern rules, instead of using the armor class where it's a low number, you just change it to ascending. And then instead of using the DACO system, you just add the +1 bonuses instead of using the subtraction. So this knows that you can do subtraction and addition, and so it also knows that you can do percentages, and it also knows that you'll know and be all right with using multiple different dice. And what that does is it spices up your adventure and it makes it interesting for everyone that's playing. Sometimes they might ask you every single time, okay, which dice I'm supposed to roll, but eventually they're going to get the hang of it, and it's fun in that way. It's like, oh, you're rolling the D10 to do initiative, not the D20. So this doesn't use the D20 system for everything, whereas some of the ones after 3rd edition, they try to use the D20 to do everything, and it has logical problems. And one of the downsides of it is the game starts to devolve and becomes illogical and also way too homogeneous. This is not homogeneous at all. It offers multiple different modes that you can play this version with. You can do the optional rules, and you can pick and choose which ones you want to use and not use. And so this version freely gives you everything you'd want to do, and tells you there's stuff you can't. It doesn't tell you what you can't do. It tells you all this awesome stuff you can do. And that's what makes this version of the game special. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition is in a class of its own. I would say that if you've never played this version, I would tell you to give it a shot. You may never look back once you do. And once you get the feel for how it's played, and you do the house rules that pretty much everyone does. Like for example, one cool house rule my brother always did as the dungeon master was the cold shot. So when you roll the 20, it felt like okay, this is a critical hit, we'd say, oh, we crit, and everybody's celebrating because you know something awesome's going to happen, and you could call your shot. It's like, okay, the evil wizard's holding this demonic gem that he's using to power up his monsters, and you say, okay, I rolled 20, I'm going to cut his hand off, and then if you're able to do that, he loses all his power, and you could win right then and there out of nowhere. And then everybody's cheering and having a good old time. And that's what makes this version awesome. It gives you the ability to freely imagine what you want the game to be and work with your dungeon master. Remember, he's the boss of this one. And if he's played for a long time in this hobby, he's going to know which ones work the best and why. And he's going to be able to explain to you which ones to do. And then you're going to be accepting all his decisions while you're playing, and you're not going to be arguing with him because he explained it right from the word jump. And at the concept part of this game, they get it right in the concept phase. So right from the building blocks of the framework of this system, and where it can't tell you exactly what you should do, it gives you multiple options on what you can do or could do. So I hope this review has helped you, and let us know in the comments if you've enjoyed this. And again, I would highly recommend you check out this version of Dungeons and Dragons and go advanced. So we hope that this video finds you having an amazing day. Comment down below and let's get a discussion going. But in the meantime, we hope that you have a blessed day and that your spirits remain high. Signing out.